My guest today is Wendy Carlin. Wendy is a professor of economics at the University College London, a fellow at the Centre for Economic Policy Research, and an expert advisor to the UK Treasury. She is also one of the founders of CORE, an organization that promotes a new approach to teaching economics.
But there is a chance that with the financial crisis and with the COVID, and with the observation that the state is necessary to sustain economic activity. I don't think I have heard any economist in the world say that we should just let the market run its course and everything collapse right now. You would say we are seeing a chance or a certainty? I mean, would you see that we're going back to something pretty near to the Keynesian paradigm? You've talked about not quite just the opposition between state and market, but something that needs more elements. Is that what's new now?
Yeah, I think that's what's new. Although in the discussion, a lot of it has been along this axis. So, I mean, I think there's a nice quote from The Economist where they said, "Big government is needed to fight the pandemic," just exactly the words out of your mouth. But what matters is how it shrinks back again afterwards. A pandemic government is not fit for everyday life. But then a really interesting thing is to see what the Financial Times editorial board said, because they were kind of giving a different twist. They were saying radical reforms, reversing the prevailing policy direction of the last 4 decades, will need to be put on the table. Governments will need to take a more active role in the economy, and policies considered eccentric, such as basic income and wealth taxes, will have to be in the mix. So even among those two kind of organs of the elite, economics establishment, there's a different sense of this balance between market and state. But what you were kind of hinting at was that this kind of one-dimensional continuum of just kind of being pushed from a pole with markets to a pole with the government and then back again, that's enough to characterize paradigms, and that's where I think it's not, and that both thinking about the pandemic but also thinking about the other looming crisis of climate really pushes to open up a richer space where we can insert a third pole. So that's the argument I would.
So this idea of community, most people who've been in this show, for example, they won't be surprised to think Daron Acemoglu, for example, think that basically, largely, what we are seeing when we look at heterogeneity in the reactions by different states to the pandemic is we're just seeing different state capabilities, different abilities of the state to react, and that we don't necessarily need to look at societies and communities. Raghu Rajan, for example, would disagree with this that pilar view. Why do you think we really, when you look at the different countries, why do you see communities as opposed to, the same UK with the same community? Many people would think if the government had acted quicker and had actually been staffed maybe better, would have actually taken better decisions. So what is this community? Is that part of the triangle really needed to understand what's going on?
Yeah, okay, that's the question. And actually there's an interesting argument that's just come up in the last few days that maybe Britain had too many very good scientists and that countries that did not have a very well developed scientific capability simply took the advice of the WHO and got on with it. And so Greece is given as an example. But that's a debate for another day.
Yes.
So I think the argument has got to be that it's. So think of just needing two, right? Just needing the pole with government at one side and market on the other, and then the claim really is that a combination of compliance with government authority, and we can make it as capable as you like, and with market incentives, very well designed, that that's adequate to deal with a problem like a global pandemic or climate change. So to suggest that that's not the case, in other words, granting all of the argument in favor of competence and excellent design for market mechanisms, then why is it that we need this third pole, which in the work I've done, all of this work is joint work with Sam Bowles, and we tend to prefer the term civil society rather than community, although people use both. And maybe just to give a little bit of padding to that, and
Yes,
to try and explain what's meant. So the argument is that we have to invoke other motives for human actions other than just compliance with state authority and material incentives. So there are other motives for action, and those are motives like reciprocity, altruism, fairness, sustainability, also identity. And those motivations lie at this third pole. And they're implemented, so actions around the third pole are implemented through social norms and through the exercise of private power, so power within a firm, for example. Those things are simply excluded from the market government discussion. And I think it's not difficult to see that when we do look across countries and even within a country over time, that if we're going to understand how things have been handled and the outcomes of actions during the pandemic, we need to draw on these other motivations. So just take the example of that there's all this very rich data, cross-state data in the US on the timing of the reduction in economic activity relative to when the official lockdown by the government, the state government in that case, was announced. And the reduction in activity happened in every state well before the law. So people were taking actions based on these other motivations without being told that they had to, or that they were following the instructions of the government. So there's a and we can think of other examples of that kind. But just to step outside COVID for a second and just think of the triangle, just to give people maybe a better idea. If you just think of what kinds of things lie in different parts of the triangle. So the triangle is kind of a space in which you're using or you're placing policies or institutions that are combinations of market, government, and civil society. So you can think of something down, if you look at the triangle, you can see down towards the bottom and the left, there's a kidney exchange. So if you think of how do you organize a kidney exchange? Well, for moral reasons, you probably don't want to buy and sell. You can't compel. So you're relying on motivations of altruism, where someone who cares about a loved one who needs a kidney is prepared to give one of their kidneys to a stranger. So that's how a kidney exchange works. So it's a motivation that's based on caring for others and a willingness to make a contribution to a stock of kidneys available for transplant. So that's the kind of motivations that and policies that where you need this space. So if we go back to COVID, then think about the really emblematic policies of the COVID. We've definitely got the ones at the government pole. So the government, as insurer of last resort, has stepped up to the mark, as we've already talked about. But then we've got things like the enormous amounts of volunteering that we've seen across societies, occurring in very different ways with often sort of national specificities. But the one in the UK was very notable. The NHS called for 250,000 volunteers. They had to say stop after 5 days because 750,000 people had volunteered. So things, activities have occurred because people are willing to make a contribution. They're willing to follow social norms. They're willing to take on risks, as we've seen across a kind of wide swathe of the front line, but also of the essential services that were certainly not rewarded in the market as essential.
Absolutely.
So think of the delivery drivers or the meat packers and so on.